I'm pleased to announce that we have reached an agreement with our fellow state employee leaders that will, over the next 20 years, save Connecticut taxpayers a total of $21.5 billion. This is the most significant agreement with state employees in Connecticut history, not just because it solves a short-term problem, but because it produces the kind of long-term structural reform we Connecticut residents, elected leaders, and our state's workforce so desperately need if we are to again grow, produce new jobs, and prosper together. Our agreement is also historic because of the way we achieved it. We respected the collective bargaining process, and we respected each other, negotiating in good faith, without fireworks, without anger. To my friends in CBAC, thank you. You have stepped up to the plate and said you want to be part of the solution. Under this agreement, we will all share in the sacrifices necessary to stabilize our state's finances. In the short term, over the next 2 years, this agreement will save taxpayers $1.6 billion. The remaining $400 million we need to balance this budget will come from a mix of additional spending cuts and existing budgetary revenue. Taxes will not be raised beyond what is already in the budget. This is the definition of a structural savings. These savings are real, and they will provide relief to Connecticut taxpayers now and into the future for years to come. This agreement should serve as the foundation for affordable public services for a generation and does not leave the bill for those services to the generations that follow. These savings were achieved in the areas of health care and pension benefits and wages. Our fellow state employee leaders have asked us to refrain from discussing the specific details within each of those categories until they've had a chance to communicate to their members, and I am happy to comply with that request. One more point. There are no furlough days in this agreement, nor is there a reduction in the 40-hour work week or 37-hour work week. This means we've achieved these savings without reducing government's ability to serve its constituents and without reducing employee productivity. I want to thank the Democratic leaders for their strength and leadership they have demonstrated. We would not be standing here today without them. I want to thank Mark Ojakian and Linda Yelmini. They negotiated on behalf of my administration, and the fact that we are standing here today is in part a testament to their thoughtfulness and determination. I also want to thank the person who has been my true partner in this administration since day one, Nancy Wyman, the best lieutenant governor any governor could ever ask for. As many of you know, Nancy has a long-standing relationship with our state employee unions and their members, and her guidance and wisdom throughout this process has been invaluable to me. Thank you, Nancy. Off the script for 1 second, it's 1 year ago this week that Nancy and I announced that we would run together for governor and lieutenant governor. I want to be very clear that, as I said the day I signed the budget, that was passed by the legislature. This is not a day to celebrate. Yes, it's a significant accomplishment, and yes, it will save taxpayers an enormous amount of money over time. But any time you ask sacrifices of people, you need to be mindful of the impact on their lives, and I am. In return for all the sacrifices they have made, state employees have received job security. But let me be very clear about this. The work of revitalizing state government has just begun, and it will continue. Over the next few years, I intend to reduce the number of state employees. But rather than doing that by layoffs, we will do it by attrition and by eliminating managerial positions. And we will make the state workforce more efficient by making smart investments in technology. We will give our state employees the tools they need to be successful. Now, this agreement must be ratified by the individual employee bargaining units. As a show of good faith, I've directed Ben Barnes, the OPM secretary, to immediately suspend the issuance of layoff notices and to rescind the ones that have been issued so far. I urge my fellow state employees to approve this agreement in a timely fashion. Once ratified by the rank-and-file workers, we stand ready to work with the leadership of the General Assembly to secure final approval. When this happens, come July 1, the state will have in place a budget that is balanced, with no gimmicks, and one that provides something that the state hasn't had in many years, fiscal stability. Most of all, it will contain the type of structural reform Connecticut so desperately needs. Thank you. With that, and within the constraints of my statement, I'll take a few questions.
Have the unions given you any idea how long the ratification votes were expected to take?
I'm not expert on that, so no, I don't. I have not had that discussion.
Can you tell us exactly where the $400 million is coming from? I know there's a built-in surplus in the budget.
No, I've directed Ben Barnes, who I've actually given the weekend off to, to work on that next week, but we'll have a plan.
You promised after the election that you'd be transparent. You often say that you're not going to play the games other governors have played. Yet, in the lead up to this announcement, your administration has selectively released documents related to budget cuts, layoffs to some news organizations, but not to others. How does this comport with your promises of transparency and no business as usual?
You know, the fact that some people get news before others is sometimes decided by what time you could publish a newspaper, and sometimes it's decided by other factors. The reality is it's all very transparent. All you have to do is buy the paper or go online.
Certain news organizations received memos about additional budget cuts, layoff procedures, the Plan B budget. Why is that? Why not release it to everybody at the same time? You know, I imagine you would get a much bigger bang for your buck.
No. Well, in point of fact, I didn't release anything to anyone, so I'll take another question.
They work for you, and I imagine they wouldn't do stuff unless they had your okay or the okay of some of your top aides. Is that correct?
When you're ready.
Layoffs, no layoffs for how long?
No layoffs for the, what is it, through 15? So I have the right year? It's 4 years.
Is this considered a 4-year deal?
No, well, no, it's a longer, what's that? I'm doing the math in my head of what year it expires.
Raises in the out years.
You know, we're not going to, again, I think that leadership needs to convey information to their members, so I want to be respectful of that.
Notices that have gone out and are in the pipeline are they getting a rescission letter?
They will be rescinded by the Secretary of OPM.
How do you get to $21.5 billion over 20 years?
Once unions have had a time, the union leadership has had a time to convey the changes contained in this agreement, that we can release more information.
Is that a time certain? Is that a time certain when the unions will be done and you can give us all the backup behind these numbers?
I believe that they're engaged in it probably right now. I want to be respectful. I was asked to be mindful that they needed to communicate. The statement that I read to you was shared with them, and I'm trying to stay within the parameters, understanding your need to develop information. I understand that, but I'm trying to be respectful.
Idea. Are you talking a day, the weekend?
Call one of them, would you?
Okay.
Can you just say, Governor, whether the savings here have been achieved through what might be considered conventional types of concessions and give-backs, or is there something else that's new and different, or a formula of some sort, or some long-range thing that achieves?
The only thing I'll say is consistent with the statement that it's structural in nature.
Governor, are you concerned at all about rank-and-file members rejecting this agreement? I mean, what's the level of concern there? And what happens if you have a scenario where some bargaining units agree to these concessions, others reject them?
Listen, I think union leadership has a job to do. I'll leave that to them. I will play whatever role they would like me to play, you know, I don't know how else to respond to that. I am hopeful that this framework is the right one. Yes. Actually, I'm going to go right there.
You've been critical about locking into long-term agreements. 4 years, no layoffs. Doesn't that tie your hands and a future governor's hands?
Well, I measure long-term as 20 years. This is substantially less than that.
What about 4 years, though?
Again, I have said repeatedly that I had no desire to lay people off in the context of the difficulties that we're having. And so no one should be surprised of the position I took. I'm sorry.
Sorry, there's been estimates on the additional revenues that are anticipated because revenues are increasing. Will you be using up most of those revenues to make up the shortfall?
Again, I've asked, once he gets some sleep, Ben Barnes to present recommendations to me. As you know, under the budget as it was adopted, we have an obligation to report no later than the 31st to the legislature. I think we can beat that deadline.
Is it fair to say that reductions in municipal aid are no longer going to be part of the...
Reductions in municipal aid would be one of my least favorite things to do.
To follow up on one of the previous questions, is the deal predicated on 100% approval by all of the locals?
I don't think that that's what's contained in the contract.
Well, what does that mean? I don't understand.
That is not.
It's not. So it doesn't have to be 100%. So if some of them reject it, then what do? You still got a hold.
This is coalition bargaining. They have rules within their coalition. I'm trying to be respectful, so if you would address that to them, I'd appreciate it.
Was there ever a point during this, were you confident all along, was there ever a point where you thought, we're in trouble here, it's not going to happen?
Every time you asked me, I said we were still talking, and that we were still talking was a good sign. We never stopped talking. We might have had an hour here or hour there where we weren't talking as much as we would have liked. So my answer to you today is the same answer that I gave you over the last number of weeks. As long as we were talking, I was hopeful.
When did things begin looking up from your perspective?
November 2nd. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.